Hey everybody, as I mentioned in a previous video, I had planned on sharing a devotional thought that the Lord had given me throughout the day. So I wanted to give it to you at this time and see if maybe it might be a blessing to you. Sometimes as preachers, we get these thoughts that kind of run through our minds, and sometimes they turn into sermons, and a lot of times let you in on a little secret. Sometimes we don't like to divulge these little thoughts because sometimes it takes away, especially if you're a pastor, it takes away your ability to preach that message later as effectively. But irregardless, I felt like the Lord had given it to me as a devotional, so I want to share it with you. But I want to talk to you about the subject of perfecting. There is a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 1 that said, "Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God." There is also another passage in the Bible that uses the word perfecting. They are variable in two different respects, that in the Greek they are two different words, but when they were translated, both using the word perfecting. When you look at 2 Corinthians, the meaning in the original Greek there was dealing with completely fulfilling or accomplishing or performing or working. When you look in the book of Ephesians, where Paul wrote there in chapter number 4 and verse number 11, that original Greek meaning, it dealt more with completely furnishing. There the Bible talked about that he gave the apostles and the evangelists and the prophets and all those sorts of things for the perfecting of the saints and for the work of the ministry. So there it was more or less dealing with the completely furnished or furnishing of the church to give them what the necessity that they needed. But in Corinthians chapter 7 and verse number 1, when it said, "Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God." I don't know why, but today the word perfecting just kind of stuck with me. And I just thought and pondered and meditated on that thought throughout the day. And I realized that in this particular passage that it's speaking about perfecting holiness. And even though I do want to discuss that aspect of it, I really wanted to think and discuss more on the overall subject of perfecting. In this passage, when it says perfecting the fear, holiness in the fear of God, most of us know that that is God's way of encouraging us as the people through the writer to make sure that every day of our lives that we are perfecting our walk with God and our talk with God, our testimony with God, and that in conversation we're holy and in action we're holy, and with what we touch, what we look at, what we listen to, everything that we do is a representation of the holiness of God. But when you think of it like this, to perfect something, you know that when something is perfect, it is that state of utter perfection where that something is as right, or it is as perfect as it possibly can be, correct as it can be, righteous as it can be. When it comes to God, he is the absolute epitome of perfection, obviously. But when you think about perfecting, when you put the ing on the end of perfect, and you're perfecting, it is a continual process. It is an ongoing thing. It is something that you're actively doing. You're actively, continually working on something. Unique as it is, whenever I looked up some information briefly today, I didn't spend a lot of time on it. If I did, I'd turn it into a 45-minute sermon. But a little bit of information that I looked up online, I noticed that one of the synonyms for perfecting is to polish or polishing. And if you think about polishing, it takes a lot of work. You know, if you've ever done that. I remember when I was a young man, I was working for a place called Morrison's Cafeteria in Lake County in the Lake Square Mall. And one day they came to me with a can of, I want to say it was Brasso, and they had a lot of brass handrails that lined the areas where people would get their food and such. and they wanted me to go over there. Here I am, I think I was maybe 16, 17 years old, and they wanted me to polish all of these handrails. And at first I thought, man, this is going to be easy, but I found out quickly that when you polish something, that it's actually a great deal of work, especially if it's really tarnished and it's really dirty, because you just got to keep working on it. You put your little bit of stuff on there, and then you use a different, rag, whatever, to wipe it till you get it clean, until you can, just about see your face in the image of it. But nonetheless, when you are perfecting something and you're working on something, it is an ongoing process. And when you really think about it, the life of the child of God should be one that we are daily perfecting some things. And I want to talk to you for a little bit, because I feel like, especially, it doesn't matter if you've been serving the Lord all your life, or you just started serving the Lord, or you're watching this little video here and you're thinking about serving the Lord. Maybe you've kind of given it some thought. Every day of your life, you should be working on serving the Lord, working on your testimony, working on so many things, perfecting, making things better. And I realize that especially those of you that may not be saved, or those of you that have seen some of the failure within the church, and you've taken a step back and you've said, man, I don't know, there's a lot of hypocrites in this thing. The sad reality is that there's quite a few hypocrites in most every aspect of life. It doesn't matter what religion or what aspect of life. Everything, everywhere you go, they're hypocrites. And that is somebody who says one thing and does another. But what I have found is that you don't have to be like that person. A hypocrite is somebody that'll tell you to do something, but they don't do it themselves. You can be the opposite of that. You can be somebody who is daily working on your walk with God. If I go to the gym and I look around the gym and I say, you know what, there's a lot of out of shape, overweight people here, I think I'm going to go home. Kind of be foolish, to be honest with you, because that's why people go there, is to work on their weight, to work on their bodily health and conditions and such, that they go there for that. But what about our spirit and so many aspects? So I want to talk to you about those things for just a minute. What about our manner of conversation? I find that I see people sometimes in church that at one time there were things they would never say, conversations they would never engage in, manners of conversations they would never participate in, words that we may never use. And there have been times I've been guilty. I'm not talking about cussing somebody out, but sometimes we get a little bit careless over a period of time. And instead of perfecting our manner of conversation, which is something that can be a tool to lead people to Christ, we're not trying. We're not trying to discipline our own self through abstinence, or from refraining from saying certain things, from refraining from engaging in conversations that are foolish, ungodly, and carnal. So what you find yourself doing is you're not really perfecting anything. You're just allowing things to be as they are. To perfect something, you are going to have to work at it. You really do. You got to work at it every day. You'd be surprised. You may think, well, that preacher doesn't go through what I go through. He doesn't face what I face. He hadn't been where I've been. You'd be surprised of my background and my testimony where I've been. And I don't have the need to cuss somebody out whenever I get angry or upset. I do get upset. I do get frustrated and angry at times. But over the years, I have perfected my conversation. For one, I realize the responsibility I have as a Christian. I realize the responsibility I have as a pastor and as a minister. And I find that the more liberal and the more loose you are with your conversation, those people who you are trying to raise up, be it your kids or those people you're trying to influence, be it the people you work with, if they hear you loosen up and start using language and talking about things that may be a little bit questionable, then it makes them more apt to ramp it up just a little bit. And I've seen it with kids especially. I forget the terminology, but there's a terminology that's been used over the years that talks about what you do in liberality, something to that degree, your children do in excess. I forget exactly how it's put, but most of you understand what I'm saying. You loosen up a little bit, those that are following you, they may loosen up a little bit more than that, and before you know it, a few generations are removed, And we've got people that claim to be Christians and they have no control over what they say, and they just, whatever's on their mind, they speak it, they say it. And that's a really sad thing when you think of it. We need to perfect our conversations. Let me challenge you to do this. You're at work and people around you are talking crazy, they're saying nasty stuff. Walk away. You don't have to be a part of that conversation. There's a portion of the Bible where it talks about having a part of the things that people do. I'm trying to remember right off the top of my head, it talks about having pleasure in them that do so. So in other words, what the Bible's saying there is talking about taking enjoyment and pleasure out of people that do ungodly stuff. What that interprets to with you is, say you're on the job and somebody's telling some nasty joke and you sit there and laugh along with them. Really, to be honest with you, that makes you no better than they are. There's some situations where you can't just get up and walk out. You may be sitting in a meeting or some situation, but you don't have to sit there and laugh along with it. You've got to perfect your testimony through your manner of conversation, and not just what you speak with your mouth, but also with your ear gate. You know, the things you allow to go into your ears. There was a time whenever I came up in the church that people really were concerned about what they allowed themselves to hear, whether it was through a movie, whether it was through a song, whether it was through a conversation. They wanted to guard the ear gate because we know that what we allow to come in a lot of times will penetrate, get into us, and it becomes a part of us. So we've got to be very careful because we can make ourselves vulnerable when we're not perfecting that every day. How do you perfect what you listen to? Well, say you're riding down the road. I just give you an example. Say you're riding down the road and a song comes on the radio that may not be appropriate, or there may be something that someone's saying in a commercial that you're watching on TV. It may not be appropriate. Change the channel, turn it off, because in the end, if you don't start tailoring and working on and polishing, if you will, or perfecting those areas of your life, you will find things get really dirty, and they get really dirty fast. I find as a pastor, a lot of times there are people that haven't been to church in a while, and they have not been perfecting really anything, and then they become looser and looser and looser, and then they become guilty because they're afraid if they come to church, they don't want to be judged, they don't want somebody looking at them, and all that sort of thing. If I can just tell you anything, first of all, quit worrying about making yourself right before you come to church. Come to church, fall on your face, get right with God. Matter of fact, you don't even have to go to church. You could bow down on your knees right now. You could say a prayer, talk to the Lord, but start working on some areas of your life, really. Start working on some things that I believe will make a big, big difference. The things you listen to and engage in, the places that you go. You cannot perfect your testimony and your walk with God if you're not giving any time to it. Let me talk to you about another aspect of something the Lord dealt with me on, and I'm trying to keep this as short as possible. The second thing that the Lord dealt with me on is the things you're giving your time to. What I have found is whatever we give our time to is what we tend to perfect the most. So people that spend 8 to 10, 12 hours a day on their job, they start perfecting that career because they're spending a great deal of time in it. People that have hobbies that every Saturday they load up the vehicle and they go to XYZ location and they do bass fishing or NASCAR or hunting or whatever hobby that it is. The more time you spend in that, the more you perfect that. If you want to become a great bass fisherman, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time out on the boat. You're going to have to throw and cast a lot out on the water. You're going to have to try a lot of different lures and a lot of techniques, and you're going to have to invest a lot to perfect that area of expertise. The same way that it is with your walk with God. We have people that they read where the Bible said perfecting holiness, knowing that perfecting is an aspect of working on our testimony in general, and they spend no time in the Word. How do you expect to perfect your knowledge of the Word if you never really engage in the Word? There's a lot of you that, and I'm going to say this with all the due love and respect I have, I've met people, and I've even pastored some, who are in and out of church. They come every once in a while, then they're gone for 3 months, 6 months, a year. You may not see them. They don't answer your call. They don't respond to you. And truth be told, I know some people like that have got the greatest potential that they could be used by God, because at one time they were really involved in the Word. And when they apply themselves, God really uses them. But then they start applying themselves to everything else and perfecting other areas of their life rather than the things that matter. Is that you? Am I talking to you? Is that what's happening with you? If it is, I'm not saying that to be harsh or abrasive. I'm saying that out of love. It's time to start perfecting some things. You know, you can never have a spiritual experience if you never have a time of worship. How do you perfect the spiritual aspect of your life if you don't engage yourself in the spiritual aspect of life? You're going to have to apply yourself. Those of you that say, you know, I feel called to preach, but I don't have anybody opening up the pulpit to me. Perfect the ministry now that is in your life so that God will open up doors for the future. You just sit around and you're lazy and you don't study. You don't get the word hidden in your heart now, and you don't perfect what God's trying to do in you now. Then when the door does open up, you're not going to be as equipped and as ready. I'm going to tell you a little funny story about me. I don't tell this very often. This is kind of crazy, but it is what it is. When the Lord first called me to preach, I remember that I had such a zeal to do the Lord's work, such a passion and a burden. And boy, I just wanted to go out and preach, win the world tomorrow. And I remember when the pastor started talking about the possibility of me preaching. It was about a month away, and I just happened to have the keys to the church. And I lived pretty close to the church. And one night I knew that there would most likely not be anybody there. It was really late at night. I went to the church and took my little sermon outline that I'd made. I didn't have no idea what I was doing. I wasn't raised in this. I didn't know a whole lot. I took my little sermon outline, I laid it up on the pulpit, and I preached to an empty church. So this Corona thing, I've already got a heads up on this. This is all right. I can preach to a camera. I can preach to nobody if I have to. But I went into that church, and some of you may think, well, man, that is just the silliest thing. That sounds crazy, and it is comical in a lot of ways. I don't do that now, for those of you that are wondering. But I went into that church because I was so passionate about making sure that when I got up, that I didn't waste people's time, that I was saying things that were going to be a blessing, that I made sure that I was perfecting that God had put in my heart. If you're called to preach, you can perfect that ministry by going to a nursing home. Go find a jail ministry. Go somewhere. Get your online broadcast going. I mean, do something. Don't just sit around waiting on some preacher to call you up on the phone, but do something now. Perfect that. Polish that thing right now. And I believe God will use that. You got family right now that you want to see get saved. I want to talk to those of you that got family that you want to see them get saved. If today they see you in church and they see Mama lifting her hands, Aunt Susie lifting her hands, Uncle Fred lifting his hands, and then the very next day they're at home and they're cussing Mama and kicking the cat and slamming the door, and they're, you know, I'm not saying that people don't get frustrated at times, and sometimes we may have to fall back on our face, oh God, help, woe is me. But when you're not perfecting that testimony and your walk with the Lord, you can't expect to win anybody to the Lord. They're not going to want what you got. So this has gone on a whole lot longer than I anticipated it to, but my heart has been full with this. So I'm going to try to wrap it up here and just tell you that it's time for you to start working on some stuff. It really is. Use this little devotional thought, and I hope that throughout the rest of this day and probably tomorrow that you'll just continue to remember that God has called us to polish those areas of our life, perfect those things. You know, work on the areas of your life that you know need attention. If you live in a house long enough and you look around, you know the areas of the house that are not the cleanest. You know if there's a little bit of mold or mildew around the base of the shower, or the toilet needs to be cleaned, or there's a little bit of junk behind the refrigerator. You usually know the areas that need to be addressed. And I'm sure that while I was talking that there are some of you that you know that there are some areas of your life that you need to start working on. And I say that in all due love and respect. And so we're going to wrap it up with that. And I'm praying for you that God will give you the grace and that you'll have the tenacity and wherewithal to keep working on those areas of your life. Don't just talk about being a Christian, my friend. Be one. Because otherwise you fall in that percentile of people that folks on the outside get sick of hearing from. They say one thing and do another, and they're hypocriting on God. So may the Lord bless you.